Back at it today with another video, as in today's video we're going to be looking at every team's 2022 MVP. Pretty simple concept here. Now let's get right into the video. Starting off with the Diamondbacks, I have Zach Gallen. Gallen broke through this year in which he posted a 2.54 ERA in 184 innings to go along with 192 strikeouts. Gallen came pretty close to winning the Cy Young Award this year, so going forward I think he's going to continue to be dominant and be a very good pitcher for Arizona. Getting onto the Braves, I have Austin Riley. Riley this year in 159 games hit .273 to go along with 38 home runs, an .878 OPS, and a 6.5 WAR. He's all around a really good player and in my eyes is still very underrated as he's one of the best offensive players in the game today. Moving on to the Orioles, I have Adley Rutschman. Some people may question this pick as Rutschman only played in 113 games, but he left his mark. He hit .254 to go along with 13 home runs, a 5.2 WAR, and also had 18 defensive runs saved behind the plate. He's a superstar in the making, and I think he was the best Oriole in 2022. Moving on to the Red Sox, I have Xander Bogaerts. I know in one of my recent videos I called Bogaerts the most underrated Red Sox, but that doesn't mean he's not a good player. This year in 150 games, Bogaerts hit .307 to go along with 15 home runs and a 5.8 WAR. He may not be a member of the Red Sox for much longer, but I think this year he was their MVP. Getting onto the White Sox, I have Dylan Cease. This is really a no-brainer as Cease nearly won the Cy Young this year. In 184 innings, he posted a 2.2 ERA to go along with 227 strikeouts and a 6.4 WAR. Moving on to the Cubs, I have Ian Happ. This was a close one. I nearly went with Nico Horner, but I think Ian Happ just slightly outedges him. Happ in 158 games this year posted a .271 average to go along with 17 home runs, a 4.4 WAR, and 14 defensive runs saved. Moving on to the Reds, I have Alexis Diaz. Many of you may not know his name, but he was a really good reliever for Cincinnati this season. In 64 innings, he locked down 10 saves to go along with 83 strikeouts, a 1.84 ERA, and a 3.1 WAR, which is really impressive for a reliever. Getting on to the Guardians, I have Jose Ramirez. This should come as no surprise as in 157 games this year, Ramirez hit .280 to go along with 29 home runs, 20 stolen bases, and a 6.0 WAR. I was really close and I want to give a shout out to Emmanuel Clase, but I think Ramirez still is the MVP of the Guardians for 2022. Moving on to the Rockies, I have Daniel Bard. Bard this season was one of the best closers in baseball as in 60 innings he locked down 34 saves to go along with a 1.79 ERA. It was a resurgent season for Bard, who got written off by a lot of people considering he was pitching at Coors Field. Getting on to the Tigers, I have Gregory Soto. Soto this season in 60 innings had 30 saves to go along with a 3.28 ERA. Soto didn't have a really good season, but when you're playing on the Tigers, you really don't have to do much to be this year's MVP. Moving on to the Astros, I have Justin Verlander. Verlander this season in 175 innings posted a 1.75 ERA to go along with 185 strikeouts and a league-best .83 whip. Being the Houston Astros, there was a lot of competition for this one, but I think Verlander deserves it. He bounced back after Tommy John and shocked the world. Next up, I have the Royals, where I'm going with Brady Singer. In 153 innings, Singer posted a 3.23 ERA to go along with 150 strikeouts. He was a really underrated but good pitcher for Kansas City, and I think he's their MVP this year. Moving on to the Angels, I have Shohei Ohtani. Ohtani put up MVP caliber numbers on the mound this year, all while putting up all-star caliber numbers at the plate. He's far and away the most talented player in baseball today, and he outedges Mike Trout as the Angels MVP for 2022. Next up, I have the Dodgers, where I'm going with Julio Urias. Urias this year in 175 innings posted a 2.16 ERA. He was very consistent and dominant all season long for the Dodgers, and I think he's one of the best pitchers in the game today. Getting on to the Marlins, I have Sandy Alcantara. This should come as no surprise as Alcantara is going to win the National League Cy Young Award. This year in 229 innings, he posted a 2.28 ERA to go along with 207 strikeouts and an 8.0 WAR. Moving on to the Brewers, I have Willy Adames. This year, Adames was really good offensively as he had 31 home runs to go along with 98 runs driven in, and defensively he had 9 defensive runs saved over at shortstop. He's a solid player, and I think he was Milwaukee's best of 2022. Next up is the Minnesota Twins, where I'm going with Luis Arraez. Arraez this year won the batting title in the American League as he hit .316 and also had the .795 OPS and a 4.4 WAR. The Twins all around weren't very good this year, but Arraez was one of the few bright spots on their roster, and I have him as their MVP this year. Moving on to the Yankees, I have Aaron Judge. This one should come as no surprise, as Judge nearly won the Triple Crown. This year in 157 games, he hit .311 to go along with 62 home runs, 131 runs driven in, an 1111 OPS, and a 10.6 WAR. Moving on to the Mets, I have Edwin Diaz. Diaz was the best closer in baseball this year, as in 62 innings he had 32 saves to go along with a 1.31 ERA and 118 strikeouts. Anytime the Mets had a lead this year and Edwin Diaz came in, it was pretty much game over. He was as automatic as it gets, and he is the MVP of the Mets. Moving on to the Oakland A's, I have Sean Murphy. Murphy this year in 148 games had 18 home runs to go along with 66 runs driven in. He may not match up to some of the other players I'm mentioning on today's list, but he was the Oakland A's best player in my opinion. Getting on to the Phillies, I have JT Realmuto. Realmuto this year in 139 games hit .276 to go along with 22 home runs, 21 stolen bases, a 6.5 WAR, and he also had 11 defensive runs saved behind the plate. He did everything for the Phillies this year, and I have him as this year's MVP. Next up, I have the Pittsburgh Pirates, where I'm going with David Bednar. Bednar this year in 52 innings had 19 saves to go along with a 2.61 ERA. While he did have a very good season, he is on the Pirates, so that may be why he's not necessarily as good compared to many of the other players on today's list, but he had a good season nonetheless. Moving on to the Padres, I have Manny Machado. Machado this year in 150 games posted a .298 average to go along with 32 home runs, an .898 OPS, and a 6.8 WAR. He was one of the best players in all of baseball, let alone the Padres, and he is going to get some National League MVP consideration. Moving on to the Giants, I have Carlos Rodon. Rodon posted yet another good season, as in 178 innings he had a 2.88 ERA to go along with 237 punch-outs. He's one of the best pitchers in all of baseball. He has really good strikeout stuff, and I think he was the Giants' MVP this year. Getting on to the Mariners, I have Julio Rodriguez. Rodriguez this year in 132 games hit .284 to go along with 28 home runs and 25 stolen bases. He was deservedly so just named the American League Rookie of the Year, and he's going to be a really good player for a really long time. Moving on to the Cardinals, I have Paul Goldschmidt. Goldschmidt this year in 151 games hit .317 to go along with 35 home runs, a .981 OPS, and a 7.8 WAR. He's one of the top candidates for National League MVP. I wouldn't be surprised to see him win the award, and he's the Cardinals MVP this year. Next up, I have the Rays, where I'm going with Shane McClanahan. McClanahan in 166 innings had a 2.54 ERA to go along with 194 strikeouts. He was the best pitcher in baseball the first half of the season, and he did fall off a bit in the second half, but still he had an amazing season. Getting on to the Rangers, I have Martin Perez. Perez surprised a lot of people and bounced back this year, as in 196 innings he had a 2.89 ERA to go along with 169 strikeouts. Perez may not have wipeout stuff and he may not strike out a ton of guys, but he's a very crafty and good starting pitcher. Next up, I have the Blue Jays, where I'm going with Alek Manoah. Manoah this season in 197 innings posted a 2.24 ERA to go along with 180 strikeouts. He was one of the best pitchers in all of baseball, and going forward I expect that to be the same. And finally, getting on to the Nationals, I have Kyle Finnegan. Finnegan in 67 innings had 11 saves to go along with a 3.51 ERA. His numbers may not jump off the page, but he is playing for the Nationals. There's really not too many good players on that team, but I don't want to discredit Finnegan. He had a really good year. Alright, so that's going to wrap today's video up. Let me know what you guys think down below.